Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another great show, Friday Drinks. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the world. We know we've got lots of people who watch the show from everywhere across the globe. So, welcome. Anytime you watch us, you know that we're having a drink. I hope you are having a drink as well. Today is quite a special day. We've got Visa sponsoring the show and also on show. And we've got Vincent here, an old friend of the show. Who's gonna, spend a bit of time. We're gonna spend a bit of time talking to him. Usually he's doing the interviewing, but this time around we're gonna, see if he still has it.
I need questions in advance.
We sent them a week ago, so you can blame your team.
Okay.
But to kick off the show, perhaps we can talk about what we're drinking. Well, I'm having a Malawi Shandy with a twist. I'm gonna put with club soda and a ginger ale and see what we can come up with. It's a lovely afternoon, and it needs something to cool off.
I thought piping hot tea was the perfect elixir for a hot sunny day.
That also helps. But once in a while, when it's a special occasion like this, it's a good time to bring out Malawi Shandy. Yeah. And gentlemen, what are you guys drinking?
So, as always, we have the more interesting beverage. Today we're having some scotch. The producer, I think the last time we had an issue with whiskey glasses, and thanks to Ranga, we have some interesting crystal.
You mean Ranga actually spent some money on something?
Booze related. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
He doesn't know it yet.
Voice drawing.
Is that why he's jumping up and down?
So I bumped into an old friend that I went to high school with, who is a fan of the show, and he decided to sponsor. Zeph decided to sponsor today's drink, and we have this wonderful single malt. It's been aged 19 years in sherry and bourbon casks. I've never had this before, so but I have pretty high conviction that this whiskey from the Isle of Jura is going to be quite interesting. I think Vincent is going to join me in this.
I definitely think that this is genuine, because there are lots of counterfeits, and I don't think you can counterfeit this one, because I've not seen it before.
Yeah, it's not very it's not one of the more commercially successful whiskies, so the risk that it would be counterfeit is very small. It is actually a serious concern, though. There's quite a few of these, especially on the low end of the market, and they not only are they counterfeit, they're actually not. They can be dangerous, because of the way they're made. So be careful if you're getting a deal on a very commercially successful whiskey that's at a price that's too good to be true. It might actually be a very dangerous counterfeit.
Well, I have to ask the question: can a connoisseur like yourself, can you not tell the difference?
Yeah, look, I think
a counterfeit. I mean, I can tell as far as clothes are concerned. I can tell if it's an original or if it's not. And I would assume that a connoisseur like yourself should be able to differentiate.
Yeah, so what tends to happen with the lower end is you're not actually going to be drinking it neat or with ice and water. A lot of the time, the whiskeys on the lower end, people tend to make cocktails and mix them up with other things. So, and once you put, a very sweet, imagine if you put a shot of whiskey in there, you wouldn't be able to tell what whiskey it was, no matter how sophisticated your palate. So if it was a counterfeit, you would have no way of telling. And because typically it's the lower end that people mix with all sorts of things, it's very hard for them to tell.
And they drink all sorts of things. At least we know what you drink. Faro, but guys on the lower end, they drink anything and whatever is available. So your palate is likely to be damaged by then, and you cannot pick, what a genuine product and a counterfeit product is.
We are going to so be accused of being snobs and elitists.
Well, that's enough booze talk for the entire year. Not that anyone cares, but it is what it is. Maybe to kick off, let's talk about you. Who are you?
What have I done?
You're on the show. Clearly, you've done something.
No,
Well, one of the good things that I want to give you credit for is for clothing Tinashe in this Visa regalia. I think he looks so much better than some of his other outfits. I suspect some of his fans will be disappointed, but
Well, it's paid for.
He was actually,
Fadzamting.
he was actually limping as he was coming to the set because of the strange regalia, but it's fine. I mean, he looks good. We are not going to ask him to stand up so that people can
see
his
Simon pants.
You are cool. Oh, you were asking who am I? I think it's pretty awkward that I'm being interviewed because I spent more than 2 decades of my life interviewing people and asking awkward questions to people, especially politicians. Yeah, but I'm a retired journalist. Left journalism in 27 and went into corporate communications, which a number of colleagues regard as a crime. You can't leave journalism and go into corporate communications. But yeah, I'm enjoying the life in corporate comms and working with big corporates, working with big brands, including international brands like Visa. It's my new life. It's my new calling.
What got you started in journalism? When did you actually decide that you were going to become a journalist?
I've always been a writer.
All right. Okay.
Yes, I think I discovered that I was a good writer. Perhaps when I was in Form 3, 4, wrote quite a number of things that won awards and so on. So I think I like writing, I like storytelling, I like listening to conversations. So it was not very difficult to go into journalism, although I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't get the good grades to become a lawyer. There was only one university when I finished A-level in the 80s. So journalism was my obvious second choice, and I went into communications journalism. So
Which newspaper did you start off with?
So I started off with the newspaper called the Sunday Gazette, under the modest publishers of the Financial Gazette. So spent some time there. They had a daily paper, the Daily Gazette. I had a short stint at Zip Papers, but my real, professional life kicked off when the Zimbabwe Independent was formed.
All right.
I joined the Zimbabwe Independent at its formation, and I was there for 95, 96, and I was there until 2017. So
Fantastic. Okay, so I've always had
21 years of
journalism. Okay.
journalism.
All right. I've always had this one important question I've always wanted to ask a proper journalist is what differentiates good journalism from, let's call it bad, or from propaganda? What differentiates, what makes for good journalism? So if I read an article, if I'm the audience and I read an article, or I watch something, what makes for good production, good journalists?
It's facts.
Right.
So journalism is about telling a story, but telling a factual story. So it's evidence. It's irrefutable evidence about whatever you are talking about. If it's a soccer match, let's talk about a soccer match. Dynamos wins 2-0. It's the evidence must be there that Dynamos actually won, or they scored 2 goals. But the problem with what we are seeing, or the other side of journalism that we are seeing, is it's information that is bereft of facts. They are no facts. And to a lot of people, facts are no longer important. But for guys practicing good journalism, they invest a lot in the process of gathering information and ensuring that they verify the information, and that whenever the information comes out, it cannot be challenged.
So there's a lot of evidence today that journalism is broken.
Yes.
And, what I'll use as an example is all the coverage around during COVID. You had these newspaper houses that were very highly respected, getting things wrong over and over and over again. Reporting that first that masks, that you didn't need masks, then you definitely needed them, and all sorts of things. So from your perspective, with your experience, why do you think that so much of journalism is just bunk?
There are two things here. It depends on what you're calling journalism, because there is information sharing that is happening a lot on social media, on blogs, which is being passed for journalism. That's not journalism. So those guys do not care about what I spoke about, facts, verifying information, and so on. So a lot of that is what is feeding the news market at the moment. So if you look at the news market now, it's no longer controlled by formal media houses where people actually invest in training, they invest in news gathering and so on. There's that leg now that also wants to be called journalism. So there's lots of misinformation and twisting of information on that side. Then we go to mainstream media, formal media. They're in trouble with these guys, with these bloggers, with guys on social media. So there's this rush to publish without verifying things. And whenever you see mainstream media making mistakes, they are taking shortcuts. And when mainstream media takes shortcuts, you create a whole set of problems in the news market. Because there are mainstream media which are trusted, which have been there for decades, for more than 5 decades. People trust them. And sometimes even when they make mistakes, people defend them. So it's actually a dangerous situation where we are at the moment, where a lot of news media are trying as much as possible to play catch up with social media. And they should not be doing that. Their job is to do journalism.
Well, we live in an instant world. I mean, that's why we invented the microwave. So instant news has its
But it doesn't sell. That's the thing. You see, everyone trying to do instant news and trying to cut corners is not making money. Look at who is making money in media at the moment, the world over. It's mainstream media, which has continued to invest in news gathering and storytelling, of course, overlaying it with technology and stuff like that.
All right. Then the other question I have is on news cycle. What's a typical news cycle? Because we hear this often.
Yes.
Somebody will say something has come out and there's a typical news cycle, whether it's a week, 2 weeks. Typically, what's a news cycle? What does it look like? And why do we even have that term, news cycle?
I think it depends on the story.
All right.
Yes, I think it depends on the story. There are stories that have got a very short cycle. They've got the story breaks. It doesn't develop from breaking. It just breaks, and that's it.
That's it. Okay.
There are stories that break and then they develop. They've got various angles, multiple layers, and that story can be kicking for a while. But I think the news cycle of a story is usually determined by the effort that the practitioner or the media house puts in that story. So you can keep your story alive for longer. You can keep it fresher for longer if you invest in giving out new information, fresh information. But in most instances, news stories should, like now with the advent of social media and stuff like that, so news stories should last not many days, perhaps 3-4 days. The story is already competing with other issues. Yeah. But in Zimbabwe, there is a big problem because we don't talk about a lot of things. There are not many subjects we talk about. Are you aware of that? If you pick up the newspaper, we tend to talk about
2 or 3.
2 or 3. Our discourse is about 3 or 4 things. So it's football, it's politics, and then in between
Women, H Metro.
women, and in between something breaks, Al Jazeera, and so it takes us away from what we are used to, and very soon we'll be back.
Okay. All right.
A lot of people in our audience are decision makers, and I suspect one of the reasons why they watch our show is because they find some of the insights and conversations, especially when you have people who know what they're talking about, like yourself, on the show, interesting. And so obviously, in the world of decision making, the quality of information and data that you're using to decide things matters. So, as a journalist, how
Retired.
how do how do you decide what content to consume? What content do you consume to just to be well informed about what's happening in the world?
I don't want to be controversial because I can be shot on the streets. But can I tell you something? If you know very little as a journalist, you're also going to write very little. So I think what you know as a media practitioner is very, very important. And there's this thing that I always talk to young guys whenever I get a chance to talk to them, that what you don't know does not exist. And with a number of guys who are in the media profession, there's a lot that they don't know. I was the same when I joined journalism, but I got to know Ranga and you, Faro, and Admire and others because I wanted to know things about business reporting, and interacting with you enabled me to know quite a bit of stuff about business. But the level of interactions here are not very good for journalists, and I feel that they need to know more. So to answer your question, I'm trying to answer your question as nicely as possible. I think you need to be well read and to know your beat. If you are going to be a business writer, please know the numbers, know what the numbers mean. I work for big corporates. We are in reporting season at the moment. We help them put together the annual reports. I get calls from journalists. So what is the story? I said, have you read the chairman statement or the CEO statement? Have you looked at the balance sheet? But they can't decipher a story from that. So it's very problematic. Sometimes if you look at business pages of newspapers, you read certain stories. I don't know if you do that.
You've given up on
no, you read certain stories and you just want to die. So I think you need to be well read. If you don't know, you go and ask. That's why I would sit down with you guys and we have fun, but I was learning things. I was hearing stuff, getting insights, anecdotes, and so on. So that's a very, very important. It doesn't matter whether you're a court reporter, football writer, business writer. You need to know, and you need to go to school. That's the.
All right, this is very interesting. But one last question that I have: we've spoken of what good journalism is.
Yeah.
Perhaps tell us what good propaganda is, so that when we see it, we can,
You have heard the statement, if you want to tell a lie, you tell a big one.
Yes.
So you can, I'm sure you know what a big lie looks like. And sometimes when you listen to guys on radio, on television, or when you read the newspaper, this is a big lie.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so good propaganda is a small lie.
No.
Is it the bigger it is, or is it the smaller it is? Is it how believable? What's good propaganda?
Propaganda is I'm not sure if there becomes an oxymoron. It is a good propaganda. I don't think there is such a thing as.
Propaganda is bad.
Propaganda
is it?
Because it's an attempt to manipulate the truth, to manipulate evidence, and so on. So I'll give you a very.
One could say this similarly about marketing.
Yes.
But there is good marketing and there is bad marketing.
Yes.
So one could say about propaganda that there is a level of propaganda that is useful because we live in a society and society works on storytelling, not necessarily on facts.
When you want to tell a story, it doesn't matter whether you're in journalism or you are in marketing or you're in corporate comms. You need at some point you will be found out. So I'll give you a good example. If you've got a product and then you go out on television, you stand on every soapbox to say, this is the best thing that has ever happened, isn't it? You are the marketing manager. But Rufaro is the PR officer of that company. Is busy fighting with people. Firefighting on Twitter. So there's that dissonance that we see. And once you have that dissonance, it shows someone is spinning out of control. So companies should never spin out of control. So the same applies to a journalist writing a story. You must not spin out of control. Stick to the facts. If product is failing, it's better to say we're fixing it and not say this is the best thing that has ever happened under the sun. So I think I often get that question. Propaganda is everywhere, but it depends on whether that's your default mode. You know, with other companies it becomes, or other organizations.
I suppose it's like salt.
Yes.
It's for taste, but you can't then put a shovel.
No, there are guys who do put salt before they even taste. So there are guys who do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Bad propaganda.
Thank you very much. The production team is jumping up and down. So thank you very much. I thought that was very illuminating. I learned quite a bit there about propaganda and also what good journalism is. I think the idea of facts is something that I personally, love. And I think that society, especially social media, would be far much better if we stick to the facts and we get to as many facts as possible. Because that's how even your decision making is made. The more facts, the better the decision making.
Even for the decision makers need facts to make good decisions. But if decision makers rely on not so true information to make decisions, it becomes very, very problematic.
Fantastic.
Good.
That was great. Join us in the second segment. That was a very interesting first segment. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very much, Vincent, for that. So now to more serious matters for the day. We've got Visa, and we're going to give you 1 or 2 minutes to talk about Visa.
Good. I think our corporate communications company, Visual Point Creative Group, has been hired by Visa to work on the Visa brand in Zimbabwe. And what we are simply doing is to promote that brand, the Visa brand in Zimbabwe, and to make sure that there's greater uptake of Visa cards in Zimbabwe, and more importantly, greater usage of Visa in Zimbabwe. That is not to say that there's no, a lot of people have got Visa cards in this country, but they don't know. If you go to an average person in Zimbabwe and say, what do you use your ATM card? They've got an ATM card or a debit card with Visa on it, but they don't know other things that you can do with the Visa card. So we've been working with banks since the beginning of the week to set up camp at banks, to assist banks with marketing Visa to their clients, and also for them to use Visa more, especially those clients who travel. They should be using Visa much more than they are doing at the moment. So that's basically what we are doing, and this is the second leg of that campaign. We worked on a campaign last year with Visa again, and this time around we are working and looking at greater usage of Visa cards.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the t-shirts and caps. Yeah, we're looking pretty decent, at least.
Yes, you're certainly looking better.
Yeah. Well, what does it say about you? but Rufaro, this is a good time for us to actually talk about money and the future of money. where do you see money going? Is the essence of what money is, or maybe we can start with what is money, and how do you see money going into the future?
Yeah, so money is basically a medium. It's an improvement on the barter system for people to exchange value. So before money existed, if I had a goat and you had some whiskey and I was making the wise, and and I wanted to trade my goat for whiskey, that's how we would trade. And if I wanted something that you didn't have, so cash, basically money is basically something that transcends, that's much more efficient than the barter system. So its primary use throughout history is as for transactions, as a measure of value.
Well, those are already two things. You talked about medium exchange.
So it's a medium
Also
of
a measure
exchange.
of
Yeah. It's also because it's a medium of exchange. It's also the two are related. It being
That's
a
true.
medium of exchange and it being a measure of value. And last but not least, for some currencies, this is certainly not true of the Zimbabwean dollar, unfortunately. It's a store of value. So if I work for a month and I get paid, and I don't spend all my income, if I'm earning in a hard currency like the US dollar or euro or Swiss franc, I can just keep that value in a bank account, and 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I'll be able to access it and it will have similar purchasing power to when I got it. So that's what money is, I think, in a nutshell. And what I think everybody...
So, and where are we now when you look at those three categories that you've highlighted?
In terms of what is...
In terms of money, where are we? Do you think that money is more of a store of value, medium of exchange, or unit of account?
So I think that the world over...
Or that those principles never change?
So I think that the world over, there's a question mark on money being a store of value. So even the US dollar, if you had $100 in 1980, you can certainly purchase significantly less today than you could with that $100 then. So, because governments, I think it's just part of their DNA to print and devalue currencies. It's just that the rate that they behave this way.
Well, that's
is
one
different.
type of money, right? The
Fiat money.
Yeah.
Gold used to be a good proxy for money, but it's obviously got its limitations, because one of the advantages of money is that it's extremely fungible. So we can do a 10-cent transaction, we can do a dollar transaction.
Divisible.
Whereas, if we all had to trade with gold, it would be extremely difficult or challenging to do a 10-cent transaction.
But it is divisible.
It is, but then you actually need to physically,
account for the...
split the gold into smaller pieces, or so there's this convenience element, and I think that's where the technology comes in, where you have companies like Visa that facilitate transactions on the internet that were not possible before. And I think so. There's this big. I always argue with George about this, about the legacy banks with brick and mortar branches with tellers that are dishing out checkbooks.
Do you still get
No, actually, it's been decades since I've had a
Well, unless you're in France, they still use checkbooks.
Yes.
There's some sort of novelty in checkbooks, I think. You can still write a bank check. There's some sort of novelty. I would like to disagree fundamentally with what you term is money. I think that at the core, and I suppose these are the different economic schools of thinking.
The Austrians,
but
and
the
everybody
Austrian,
else.
At our core of what money is store of value, right? So money must have its use in its own, on its own. It must have some sort of use, because if it doesn't have that particular use, then it's not a store of value. And this is the debate that people have, and I think one of your esteemed people you look up to Nassim.
Nassim Taleb.
Talib,
The
you know.
cantankerous Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, he comes out very strong against, for example,
Bitcoin, he's not a
crypto.
fan. Yeah.
Primarily because it's got a store of value of 0. So what we mean by that, in essence, is saying that whatever we deem to be money, if we cannot exchange, if it's not a unit of account, I must be able to use it for its own sake. So, for example, gold. If nobody wants my gold, if I have a stack of gold and nobody wants my gold, what do I do with that gold? I can actually build a house with that gold. I can build.
That sounds ridiculous, though. I mean, the idea of building a house with gold, seriously?
Have you not heard of yachts that have been built of gold?
No.
And it's there. You can use gold as a substitute for bricks.
Okay.
So what we're saying is
That's
what heaven. That's what heaven is like, right?
I wonder what movies has been watching.
That's the idea of the year. I like that. Gold as a substitute for bricks.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you have yachts that are made of gold. So the idea is, suppose nobody wants your crypto. Suppose nobody wants your Bitcoin. Suppose it's the end of the world and nobody wants your Bitcoin or your crypto. What can you do with those cryptos or with that Bitcoin? And that's the question. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying that actually I think that crypto is money and it has some sort of value. I would actually buy into it, especially where we're going and especially what's happening globally with technology. But I think that we should always keep in mind, and this is the cautionary tale to everybody who's in crypto or wherever, is that whatever we deem to be money must have its essence as a store of value. Never mind the ability to transact and the ability as a unit of account. What are your thoughts on that?
So I follow Nassim and I have great respect for his perspective on most things. Like have you read the Black Swan?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Fooled by random.
Yeah, fooled by randomness, skin in the game. I think I've read everything that is published except the technical stuff. So he's absolutely right that if there was the apocalypse was tomorrow, you couldn't do anything useful with Bitcoin, right? And that's true. But there's another intellectual who's got a different perspective that I think is more valid when we discuss money. Yuval Noah Harari, and he says, look, money is this mythical thing, right? It only has value if people believe it has value. Okay, because on any given Sunday, there's an exchange rate between the US dollar and the rand. Nobody can say scientifically, empirically, that this is what the exchange rate should be. It's a function of millions of market participants transacting, and you end up with a rate. And it's because of perception more than reality. So if you accept that view, then money will be valuable as long as people believe it's got. Yeah. If everybody in the world today decided that actually the US is in decline and US dollars, nobody's going to accept them this time next year, immediately.
Let's hear what Vincent has to say. We've had the two competing goals. So this idea that money at the end of the day, if the world were to end, if it's crypto, it's got absolutely no value.
Yes.
So it's got a value of 0. So it cannot be money by definition. And then you've got the other idea that argues that actually, while that is true, it actually doesn't matter in the world that we live in, because money is deemed to be valuable as long as people deem it to be valuable.
And as long as people want to use it.
And as long as,
I think that would be my response. As long
as.
I think that argument, I think it's very, I don't want to use the word, let me use the word pedantic. But I want to be realistic and then say people will need money. And they need money they can use. Let me put it that way. So whatever agency of transaction that you want to employ, as long as people want to use that, It's fine. I mean, we were trading in petrol. Petrol became money.
Petrol coupons, yes.
Oh,
Once
petrol
upon a time.
coupons. It became money. It became an agent of transaction.
Oh, because if nobody wants to trade, you could always fill up
yes,
your
and put,
tank
and put
drive off
fuel in my
and go else.
in
Whereas
in a
with crypto,
drum and-
with crypto, if nobody wants to trade, what do you do with the crypto?
nothing. But I think that argument. Now that argument. That argument. I think we need to put it out more and find out what people think. Because I think the argument about crypto in this country, I've listened to various fora where people talk about crypto. I think it's very high there. It's up there.
We need to
I think we need to dump it
simplify
down a
it.
bit
Yeah,
and simplify it, and then say to people, this is what crypto means. And you opened up with the goat and gold and whatever. So it needs to be brought sometimes to that level so that people actually understand it. But
okay.
at the moment, we have got a very
The way I would put it,
yeah.
and I don't know if Ruparo can debate this or agrees with me on this, is the rise of crypto was primarily predicated on the fall of
Fiat.
That there's so much control over fiat. So crypto, if fiat was well managed, if our money was well managed,
How
the
do
dollar,
how do you define well managed?
inflation debasement. So
Okay.
and I think Rufaro did a fantastic job in explaining that if I had $100 100 years ago, in essence, it should still be $100, and its purchasing power should still be $100 today.
yeah.
But it's not, because the guy with the power to issue has been continuously debasing that particular currency, and because of that, inherently people have to find an alternative. And while the alternative has its limitations, as long as the alternative doesn't have unlimited supply, as fiat has, then the alternative will always have value.
What about uptake? If, let's say, people had grabbed
A fantastic story. Yeah,
Yes.
fantastic. So then crypto, and I think this is the phase that crypto is going through. Because if we're being honest, crypto has just been around for 13, 14 years. So it's going through what we call usability.
Okay.
So what made gold the last to actually be relevant is because gold was found everywhere. So unlike silver or copper or other minerals, some people were just not familiar with it. Whereas gold was, if you look at right across the world, the globe, it was something that people could actually identify with and knew what it was. And I think that crypto is going through its information phase, where, and this comes back to your information age. In the information age, it's about as much information as possible. And I think that when we have that information and people become more familiar, the biggest problem now that crypto has is its volatility. It's highly volatile. So it has to be stable, and it has to be greatly, it must be a currency that everybody can understand. But I also think that it has a derivative value, in that it's only valuable because fiat is less valuable. As long as fiat is protected, then I don't think that crypto will necessarily have a strength. And I think that that's where I sort of agree with Nassim. Not that I agree with Nassim, but I like his logic, because what Nassim is trying to say is, at the end of the day, when you look at fiat, it has the support of a government. So the support of violence, right? And we're forced to use Zim dollar. If you're a civil servant, you're forced to use Zim dollar, whether you like it or not. Or up until the Zim dollar is actually useless. What does crypto or all these other currencies, what do they have?
Yeah, but okay, so I think violence for the world's major currencies is not. I wouldn't use that as like the primary underpinning of the currency. I think
For one-off.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at Europe or if you look at the US, one of the reasons why there's faith and confidence in the currency, even though it's going to debase over time, is that those places are productive and they're growing. So you know that, look, so yes, they're running up all this debt, they're doing all this printing, they're being irresponsible, but over time they are productive and they grow. And So it's not a horror story like we experienced in Zimbabwe between, say, 1998 and 2008, where we woke up one day and nobody wanted to accept the local currency for anything because we had just gone completely overboard in how irresponsible we were with our printing.
So crypto is a bet that the world will go completely berserk, and you're saying no. I don't.
Yeah, I think you know, as much as I'm very critical of, you know, even the Fed and the ECB for how they've managed their currencies and their interest rates and that sort of thing. I think fundamentally they're not going to go off over the cliff.
Okay.
They're not going to, you know, I think, yeah, they're not going to reach Zim levels.
All right.
So what's going to drive its uptake and growth? Because you know, my feeling is that growth and uptake should come from developed economies. But if developed economies, where is the push going to come from?
I think stability.
Stability.
If it remains highly volatile, people will be scared.
Okay.
But I think that if it has some sort of stability, because, for example, if I'm going to exchange my phone with some sort of crypto, I would like to know that the price is not going to change. I'm not going to try and change the price every second because my crypto is changing every second. Or even if I make a purchase today, in a year's time, I want to know that it is still the same value or, you know, more or less. And right now it's extremely volatile. So I think that it's the buccaneers, the people who are risk-taking, who are pioneering in the use of crypto. And I think that the success of crypto will be predicated purely on its stability.
Okay.
The minute it remains stable of some sort, and I think you'll find a lot more people using it. I mean, similarly to gold, that's why gold has remained stable for a very long period of time because people trust it.
I'll argue that gold hasn't remained stable. You know, I don't know whether you can accommodate the rabbit hole, but so there's a very interesting perspective about measuring progress and the value of money, and it's this idea of and I think the Austrians would love it actually because you guys are pretty conservative. So the idea is that we should measure prices in terms of, like, if we're going to compare the price of a loaf of bread today with the price of a loaf in 1980 or 1950 or whatever, instead of using currency, what we should do is say, how many loaves of bread does an hourly wage of an unskilled person buy today versus 1980 versus 1950 versus any period of time, to see what, you know, whether the price of things is going up or not, or things are becoming more scarce or more abundant. And what you'll find for gold, which I found quite fascinating, is if you look at the price of gold in 1900 in terms of how many units an unskilled worker could buy with an hour of labor, they can buy much more today than in 1900. So in terms of that unit of value, which is an hour's wage, gold has actually not held its value. It's actually become less scarce and more abundant.
Okay, so then I would say that the Austrians would totally disagree with you, and in fact most economists would totally disagree with you because you're now mixing matters. So when you look at the hourly rate, people have become wealthier over time, right? So if you look at the person who in 1900, what the number of hours that they had to work.
Yeah, the baker in 1900, unskilled.
Exactly. And what has happened over time is, with innovation, is people have become
much more productive
and much more wealthy. And the question actually, where gold actually helps, is how much or how wealthier are they? How much wealthier are we today? And probably a good base in which we can measure that would be an ounce of gold in 1900, it's still an ounce of gold
Today.
So what could you do with an ounce of gold and what could you do with an ounce of gold only explains how much innovative we've been. But the value actually hasn't changed. But to your point, and I think I need to make this very clear, is that gold is only as valuable as the amount of supply that's actually there. Right? Because remember, we still dig it up. And if we do dig it up, like we did in the 1940s, we increased the supply of gold. But it just means that we become wealthier. Right? Because you need far less to buy the same amount of gold. And there is, and I'm sure you've used this as an example of why people are exploring space. It's because there's considerably a lot more gold in space than there is on Earth.
So
and if we find that gold,
so all the gold on Earth is not indigenous to Earth. It's actually from meteor impacts millions of years ago. So it's not one. When the Earth formed, some 5-6 billion years ago, gold was not one of the elements that were part of the Earth. That's an interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting anecdote, but that's an interesting debate altogether. But what we're hearing is that money is still going to be relevant. Visa is still going to be relevant for a very long time.
Yes.
That's good to hear. Unless Visa comes up with its own crypto, then it can play in that market as well. Interesting discussion there. I hope the viewers gained as much as I did. Thank you, Rufaro, for that. And see you in the next segment. Welcome back to the third and final segment. It's bound to be very interesting. So far, the two segments have been very interesting. Fire. Okay, and this one is particularly for you, Rufaro, because not only were you an auditor at some point, you're an analyst and you understand this. The results season is here.
Yeah.
We've seen a number of companies produce their ZWL results, so this is in the local currency. Can you make head or tails of what's actually happening with our results? Can you read and understand those results?
Yeah, it's a very frustrating reporting season for an analyst because all the companies are reporting in Zim dollars, in inflation adjusted numbers, and frankly, for the most part, those numbers are gibberish. Right? They are. It's just.
I think that's a strong way. That's a strong way. Okay.
It's almost impossible to unpack them and make sense of them because,
what do you think is the problem is?
It's the currency, right? So, and I remember actually I was, in the profession at the time that we did hyperinflated numbers for the first time. If the judgment calls that an accountant makes when they're putting together those numbers can, the scope of the spectrum is reasonably wide. So the assumptions that one company makes can be very different from the assumption that the other company makes. And also what tends to happen is, so you have a business like TSL, for example, where they generate their revenue, most of their revenue in one half of the year. In the other half of the year, not much happens on the revenue side, but a lot happens on the cost side. But you can't, that's not going to be clear to you when you look at the inflation adjusted numbers. A lot of the actual detail, the meat of the numbers is lost when you hyperinflate them. So, Vincent thinks it's a strong word, but when you look at some of these accounts, they become gibberish because you can't make any sense of them. A company like Delta, for example, if you told me that they sold more hectoliters of lager beer this year than last year. I think anybody can understand what that means. It means their business has grown, they've sold more beer, right? But when you look at it, when you look at the inflation adjusted numbers, that can be lost. And sometimes because of the translation, there are these huge monetary losses on the books, which nobody understands, right? You know, I think it's a big challenge for not just the analyst community, but for the investment
stakeholders.
Yeah, all the stakeholders, you know.
So maybe Vincent, you can come in here in terms of communicating, because this is no longer journalism. This is you now trying to communicate to the greater stakeholders. What's your take on the results?
I think it's not an easy one, because if you talk to guys preparing these numbers, they are not very clear about certain things. I had an occasion to talk to one guy who was preparing numbers, which we were compiling and putting into a book, and they have multiple challenges. And the question that I kept asking them was, what does it mean for me as a shareholder? Because it should mean something. I'm not sophisticated, perhaps I just bought shares, I just buy shares, but what does it mean for me? And I think when reporting these numbers, the narrative, I think there should be, there was a time when, you know, when you guys were doing inflation, when we were doing, was it Quoted Companies magazine, there will be a whole section trying to unpack this aspect of inflation adjustment of numbers in that book. And I think it helped, you know, laymen like myself to understand what is happening. And what I see missing in those reports is information that is not very technical but useful. Because I think a lot of companies reporting communicate to, you know, to Rufaro, they communicate to Ranga, they communicate to Tinashe, they understand the jargon and so on. But I think there is more to that. And then there is interpretation of those results. I think it's and this is where, you know, journalists and media practitioners come through. We have shortchanged the reader, or the investors, or the guys who buy shares quite a bit, because no one has been able to unpack what's happening and to give it a narrative that actually makes sense. But I think we have got a huge challenge at the moment, and it's a challenge that is brought about by the state of the economy. And I think
But Vincent, what you're actually saying is, you're saying previously we got it right, and hyperinflation was actually higher. We were able to still unpack.
Yeah, because
I'll push back to what you're saying. So even if you explain to the average consumer of
Yes.
financial statements exactly how hyperinflation works, okay? So we're in April now, okay? Last week or the week before that, you have these results coming out for financials for the year ended 31 December 2022. Okay, what was the exchange rate on the 31st of December 2022? You know, what is the exchange rate today? Okay, so if you need to make a decision about whether a company that reported
It's useless.
last week, whether it's cheap or expensive or it's doing well, how are you gonna?
The information is now redundant.
How are you going
When
to
you
use
reply
those?
to that, how was it possible that back then you were able to still communicate?
it's exactly what he's communicating, exactly what he's saying. Because I know there was a year when we almost said we have no confidence in these numbers that we are giving you, because that was an honest assessment of what was happening on the ground. But at the moment, we are trying as much as possible to say, yes, the economy is growing, we have made a profit, everyone has made a profit, yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
Everyone has made a profit, everyone is looking good. That's, you know, that's
And then you have this
picture that we
conundrum.
are seeing.
You have this fantastic conundrum, right?
Yes.
Where you've got this migration from the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange to the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. The Victoria Falls Stock Exchange It's a US dollar currency exchange. The shares are priced in dollars. Okay? But the companies are reporting in Zim dollars. Financials. Right? So how do you decide what US dollar price?
I was going to ask you exactly that question. Then how do you reconcile this?
Yeah, how do you decide, and there's a huge gap between
everything that you're saying, I've got another more important question to ask you. Do the authors of these numbers actually understand the numbers themselves?
So what I will say
when you interact with management, do they actually understand the numbers?
I can say with very high conviction that the audited financials they're just they're compliance numbers. I don't believe anybody running a listed business is making decisions based on hyperinflated accounts. Their management accounts, I will bet, are in USD or are in units that are impervious to all the messiness of the Zim dollar. And it is a great disservice to shareholders to decide, I'm running this business with real numbers that make sense. Okay, I'm using unit sales or US dollars, but you, the guy who owns the company, you must use gibberish.
Vincent. Interesting. So, Vincent, I've got a question for you, and this is to the greater public: is if all these numbers are gibberish, and they're feeding into what Zimstats then produces as the national GDP, what
now
then,
with this fantastic thing that we've invented called the blended rate,
of course.
and I want you to draw you not to the numbers, but to something that you said earlier on, and that touched me greatly, about propaganda and facts. Now, if we have national numbers that are actually not factual, then what are we doing? Does it mean our GDP is actually propaganda?
How do I respond to that without
offending?
Well, you worked for the Independent for 20 years. I don't think you care about offending people.
And this, I want you to answer from a communicating. What are we actually communicating?
I think we are clever as a nation, and Zimbabweans are not foolish. So if you say, as the Zimstars, is it 70% of transactions are in
75 or 6?
What's the number?
75%.
Yeah.
So 3/4
transactions are in USD,
in real money.
And then when you talk about other fundamentals, you go ZWL. I don't know. I don't know how we reconcile that. So what I'm simply saying is we must look at ourselves in the mirror and be very honest with ourselves and say, if we are going to get proper data that is useful, that is usable, what currency are we going to use? At the moment, there's a whole lot of confusion. I'll give you a good example. We participate in government tenders. Say, okay, we want to do this for example.
So are you one of those contractors?
The tenderpreneur.
That have overblown
You ask me a question, let me answer.
$9,000 laptops.
Computers.
So what is causing that? What is causing that? 2, 1 is ignorance on the part of the tendering guy. They think that people will just accept any number. The other thing is people want to survive. They think that if they put this number, they will survive. But the long and short of it is
that when you say survive, is that a euphemism for something else?
No.
Or it's surviving?
It's a simple word. I'm not defending $9,000 computers, by the way. That is outrageous. But a lot of guys need to understand that, for example, you tender for something today and you put $1,000 for this computer, which is fair. So government will say, right, we're giving you the contract, Rufaro, but we pay you in ZWL at the interbank, at the official rate.
3 months after you deliver.
6 months after you deliver. So all that creates a lot of confusion in the market. And I'm sure end of year last year, government was trying to put that right. Good luck. I'm sure they've managed to do stuff with that. But I think to go back to your question, Tinashe, the numbers that we have at the moment are not a clear reflection of the state of the economy. They are not. They are not. We speak of growth where there is no growth. I was looking at, sorry, I shall not speak of the company, certain companies' numbers this morning. So I took out their last year's numbers, put them side by side. And what you see is the company has actually gone backwards in a big way. If you were just going to convert their numbers to USD last year, USD numbers. But the headline is growth 64% or something, something like that. So I think at the moment, for the uninitiated, there's a lot of propaganda. Now I'm back to your lingo. There's a lot of propaganda about the state of the economy, and the state of the economy is felt in my pocket more than it should be felt in rhetoric. So I feel that to cut that, you need to call a spade a spade. You know, what did we spend last year in US? What did we earn this year in US? If you do that with a lot of companies are not in good state at the moment, and it's very, very unfortunate that the narrative that we have to push is one of being in very, very good, financial position. We are healthy, everything is fine, happy ever after.
So you bring up an interesting idea in my mind when you say that, which is to say, over the last 5-10 years, we have this narrative of things are getting better all the time, and particularly the last 5 years, there's a loss of credibility, confidence in pronouncements,
in numbers,
coming from the state.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, what do we as a country need to do to start earning back that credibility, so that if Treasury has a press conference tomorrow and announces a policy action, we take them more seriously? Because we're getting to a point where you read these statements and you just roll your eyes and laugh or cry.
I'm going to throw that back at two guys who do more market analysis, economic analysis. There was a time when the national budget was a real event. The national budget would stop everything. In fact, people, including those with very little knowledge of economics, would switch on the radio to listen to the national budget. It's not happening now.
It's irrelevant.
So, you ask me a question, I don't have an answer. I'm going to ask you, how do we make the things like the MPS, monetary policy statement, the national budget relevant again? Because there was a time when that was really relevant. And
it's now
in my early days as a young manager, we would sit down and take the national budget and say, what does it mean for our business? We'd sit and start to break it down and say, this bit is important for us, I don't know if companies are still doing that today. If they are not, why are they not doing it?
It's becoming relevant. Let's use a very good one, a national budget that actually used to affect everybody, whereas now it's becoming relevant. It's when you look at your salary increment, it was based on that budget. So immediately when the budget came, it made assumptions about what the inflation rate would be for the next year.
That were realistic,
bargaining,
unbelievable.
And your collective bargaining was now premised on that particular budget. So if you look at what happened with Mtuli's budget for 2022, whatever numbers he gave, it took us 3 months, and he's got new numbers for the salary, for civil servant salaries. So he's totally abandoned what he said in 4 months ago, and he's got a new schlep altogether. And I think that's where the problem is. And that's the problem of hyperinflation. That hyperinflation just confuses everybody. And it's now more about storytelling and it's less about the facts. And nobody can actually come through to actually get
And we're actually not having an honest conversation. I think one of the things you were griping about on Twitter or somewhere else is the national accounts, the numbers that we're supposed to review in terms of money supply and other important indicators, they're becoming late more and more and more. They're not released on a timely manner. So you can't actually see what's happening until, so when the rate runs away, like I think it's moved quite aggressively over the last 2-3 weeks. Everybody's asking the question, what's happened, right? But in a normal economy where you've got access on a timely basis to money supply growth, to all these other...
Do those things still exist here? M3 and stuff?
Well, the Reserve Bank was producing a weekly report
Yes.
on money supply, on reserve money, on a weekly basis. The last time they've done that was in December.
And that's the reserve money. Reserve money is the least interesting
Yes.
of the M's. Right? Because I think it's M2 or M3 that really matters in terms of moving the needle and the exchange rate and that sort of thing. Right? So even reserve money, which
they have total control over and could give us on a weekly basis.
They used to talk about how it's not moving, about how it's reflecting how disciplined they are. Even that, we don't have the numbers.
Gentlemen, this is fantastic, but the producers insist that the show is over. And I must abide. This was a lovely show. We thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Vincent. We hope to see more of you. Rufaro, I suggest you take more and more of this. I think you're very sober today. I don't know. Is it because it's not quite as great as the other ones, or?
No, I quite like it.
It's not like you were going to give a bad review. But anyway, audience, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Visa. We really appreciate you coming on board, and we hope to see more of you. And to our audience, please keep the questions coming. Join us. Tell us what you're drinking, and have a fantastic weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.